I'm very happy to actually introduce you to quite a new minister here in Ireland. Richard Bruton has actually been now elected or appointed as the Minister for Communications, Climate Action and Environment. And myself, having worked with previous Irish ministers of climate action, it's a real pleasure to welcome Richard here, because actually Ireland has been quite active in the discussions for a small country, clearly wanting to have its own independent framework around how climate is influencing the country, a very large agricultural sector in Ireland, an area which clearly does have an impact on climate, but also very important to ensure that we take that into consideration in terms of the communities that are built up and the different sectoral aspects within the Irish context. So it's a pleasure to welcome you to the stage, Minister. Thank you very much for joining us. And then the Minister and I will have a little bit of a chat. Do you want to come up and say something here? And then we can sit down afterwards. Up to you.
Well, thanks very much indeed, and first welcome you here to Dublin Castle. As you know, it's a fantastically historic building and part of the city, and I hope you get a chance to enjoy it, although the weather is typically Irish, being a little bit damp today. But it is, as you say, I'm only 2 weeks in this job, so I suppose you'll have to make a little bit of allowances for me, but I'm thrilled to be here, and I'd like to particularly welcome Nick Robin, who I know was a founder of the SC4S, and Pierre Ducret, who is a vice chair, am I right, of that global UN-backed initiative, which we are proud to be seeing the establishment of a European element of it here, and a particular platform being developed here in Ireland. I'd also like to welcome Kirsten Dunlop of the KIC Knowledge Innovation Centre, which I suppose is at the heart of how do we face and challenge these challenges of sustainability. Their work is so pivotal to that. I suppose this is an area of huge shared challenge, and I had the opportunity to read the Intergovernmental Panel. Well, I'll have to be honest, I read the policymakers' version, which was only 40 pages. I didn't read the full tome. But it is absolutely clear that the policies that have been agreed nationally across the globe are not putting us on a course that would see the rise in temperature stabilise at 1.5, and that the trajectory that we're on is going to see very significant new risks emerge, with rising sea levels above what was previously forecasted, greater weather events causing huge disruption across the globe, new and additional ecosystems at risk, areas under water stress increasing. So from an investor perspective, and I know you ultimately are talking about the financial aspects of sustainability, clearly the risk dimension that any investor has to factor into the decisions you make, they are on a very escalating scale. And you are going to have to work, I suppose, both between regulators, funders and the whole financial community, working out how those risks will impact and how we make the investments now that can prevent the outcomes that are so feared. I suppose Ireland is no different, and I have responsibility obviously for the Irish dimension in this. We are no different from other countries reported in the IGE, the Intergovernmental Panel. We are well off course ourselves for the sort of ambitions that we have committed to in terms of CO2 reduction. And I think, my ambition is that we need to move from being a follower to be a leader in terms of climate change, and this capacity we have to take initiatives to meet this challenge. Because there's no doubt if you are a follower, you face greater costs in the long term of adapting and adjusting to the challenges. But you also forfeit the opportunities, and there are many opportunities in being an early mover in terms of addressing the low carbon economy and what it can mean, and the enterprises that can thrive in that environment. But I'm also conscious it will require a revolution in how we live, and every citizen, every community, every enterprise, every public service, is going to have to think through how they change the way they live if we are to meet this challenge. And I think, we need, at a political level, the emergence of a growing consensus, but there's no doubt we also need, in financial services, an understanding of what this risk is, because a lot of what will determine our capacity to mitigate this risk will be the investments we now make and how they are to be funded. We have set out our own national mitigation plan, but it is no more than a first step. And it is my intention that we will introduce a new approach within the Irish government, which will be an all-of-government approach to face up to this challenge. And we will use models that have been successful, in my own experience, in meeting the challenge of the complete economic crash that Ireland suffered when we lost 20% of our employment base. Private sector employment was wiped out in the space of 3 years. We successfully used a cross-government model focused on implementing concrete actions with clear responsibility focus, and we have driven back our economy to a stronger point now than it was before the crash. We need to take the same sort of decisive approach, hopefully led from the Taoiseach's office as well as from an office like mine, because it's often said, if you can bite with the President's teeth, you have much more impact in driving forward change. And clearly that is the approach that we want to deliver. And I'm glad to be in the position that the Taoiseach is very up for this challenge. I think Ireland has put in place a number of things that are the start of an exciting journey. The Minister of Finance, who should have been here to address you today, and I'm subbing up for him, but he has been key in the author of what we call Project 2040. And it is the first time an Irish government has ever put its 10-year investment plan behind the vision of a compact, connected, regionally balanced and sustainable Ireland and a sustainable growth path. And that is a huge change with what has gone before. Ireland's pattern of development, as many of you will know, and I suppose was part of why we suffered such a crash, has traditionally been not led by a framework, but tended to be developer-led, bank finance-led, speculator-led, not within a very clear framework of sustainability. We have recognised that that must shift. But of course, saying it and committing to 116 billions worth of investment and making it happen are two different matters. And we have to underpin that new ambition, that plan, with regulatory requirements, with policy initiatives, with concrete investments that make that a reality. Equally, of course, price matters, and any of you who are assessing investments will know that the price signals that are there make a huge difference to the investment decisions. I think pricing can play a significant role. We are determined that we will have a trajectory for carbon price in Ireland that allows people who, instead of locking themselves in now to high carbon usages, can plan on the basis that carbon price will be following a trajectory where they ought to be investing now in lower carbon using patterns of living. I also recognise that innovation can be a really powerful tool, and Kirsten, I know, is driving the ambition across Europe. We have done made part of our plan that I mentioned, which was, I suppose, launched by the Minister of Finance. We have two very new powerful tools which we hope will leverage new innovation and thinking in this field. We have a Climate Action Fund worth 500 million, and we also have a Disruptive Technology Fund worth 500 million. And they are both looking at how can we, they're inviting applications in a competitive process to identify how can we leverage innovation to change the sort of investments that we make, to emphasize sustainability, to bring forward new ways of meeting challenges. And those two significant funds together, representing $1 billion of investment, will be big drivers, I hope, of innovation within Ireland, but also crucially partnership with the much wider European network, which Kirsten represents, and can be a vehicle for us collectively addressing challenges that we face. I suppose the other thing that can be said is, that however ambitious the public sector might be in its investment, it certainly cannot fund the scale of investment. I think it is the European Union have done a calculation that the requirement of investment is roughly 180 billion per year is what we would need of additional new investment in Europe if we are to seriously address the climate change challenge and get the trajectory for carbon down to the level that would stabilise at 1.5 degrees increase in centigrade in temperatures. It's very clear that government cannot fund that. And the big challenge I think that governments will have is how do we work with you as funders to create the environment, obviously the regulatory requirement, the better pricing signals, but also the access to funding. In my own very narrow area where we're looking at, say, the Irish housing stock, which uses, I think, 58% more energy than the rest of Europe, we have a huge challenge. And it has been estimated that the investment that would need to be made in the Irish housing stock over the next 15, 20 years is 50 billion. The government will have less than 5 billion available to it to, if you like, incentivize that investment. Much of that investment is quite, the paybacks are very, very long. We will need innovative thinking to make that happen. And I think that's why your theme here about how sustainable financial innovation can play a part in making these things a reality are so important, because they do have huge global paybacks to yield, while they may not be so easy for the individual investor alone. So government can do stuff around pricing, around regulation, but most of all it needs creative funding as well. That's why I think it's particularly welcome that we are today, over this conference, launching the European node of the UN's Financial Centre for Sustainability, which Pierre is a leading light in the development of. I think this is a real opportunity for Ireland. We already have very significant strengths in the financial service sector that many of you will know about. We have a very strong existing base of asset managers. We have a very strong cluster of talent. We have many professional firms who are expert in sustaining the investment world. But what's really important is that we create this new class of asset. And I know from talking to Pierre and Kirsten, it is regulatory thinking needs to evolve in the financial service as to how this asset, this real risk that we face, can be turned into something that is viable for investors to invest in. But I'm very pleased to say that the first Irish Green Bond was just launched very recently. It raised 3 billion in syndicated money at 1.399% yield. Pascal was very important about those 3 digital places. And the order book was 11 billion, so it was many times oversubscribed. But it shows that there is an appetite for an investment class that focuses on projects that will transform the line of travel for our country. And no doubt, with the support of what you are doing in developing new innovative approaches, we will be able to get much further. But I suppose the challenge also goes much far beyond the landscape that's well understood by economists like myself, or I expect financiers like yourselves, or even public policy makers. I think that is also the challenge. I have come from the Department of Education, where there is no doubt we are preparing young people for a very different world from the one they've known. And most of that focuses on the impact of the digital revolution on the way they learn, the way they will work, the sort of competences that they have. But equally, I think it's true to say that probably our most powerful asset in changing the way we think about climate risk is going to be our education system and the generation coming up behind us who will bear the impact of it, but also have the intellectual flexibility to think outside of the box. And just as they are preparing for a different world than many of us who were through education in the years gone by and are focusing on new competences, I think we need to encourage our education system to be leaders in the challenges that we all collectively face in meeting what is going to define our century. The decisions that we make here over the next couple of years will certainly define Ireland's role in what is the challenge of the century. And I'm really pleased that we have been able to host this international conference, which starts to put together the building blocks, just as we are in my sphere of operation as a representative of the Irish government, now putting together the building blocks that can drive our ambitions forward. I'm really looking forward to the work that you can do, which will create that wider environment that will make it easier for us to leverage the scale of private commitment and private investments that's necessary if we're to fulfill our ambitions. So I'd just like to thank you very much. I suppose it was coincidental that Pascal gave me the call to say would I sub up for him, but it really suited me well, because this is the first time I've had the opportunity to say anything about my new mandate, and I am pleased to be at a conference where there's so much new thinking going on, to be able to be a small part of that. And no doubt our representatives, and we have representatives from our own department and from the Department of Finance, we will be picking up and picking your brains, as you might say, for some of the types of initiatives that we can drive and how we can look to the wider European and global networks to help us fulfill our ambitions. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I think you're going to, did you say a fireside chat? But it will be a carbon-free fireside chat. You'll be pleased to hear. So I'm looking forward to that. I hope the questions aren't too difficult. So thanks very much.
So this is the climate new fireside chat methodology, which is you don't actually have a fire. First of all, Minister, thank you. And I must say that I was very pleased to hear that you indicated that you feel that actually the Irish approach might need to go a bit further. And so I'd like to ask you, where do you see you need to focus your attention in that sense? Many of us have read the IPCC report, and like you, have been a little bit stunned at now the reality that 1.5 is really the goal, and if we don't do something quickly in laying the foundations to get there, then we're at 3.5, 4, and some have even indicated 5 degrees. So where would you focus your efforts first? Where are you feeling that it's necessary to focus first?
Well, I think in a few words, I hope I gave some impression. I think we start with what we have. And Project 2040 is a very ambitious plan. It is about compact development, sustainable development. We've never done that before. We have never succeeded in fulfilling an ambition for more compact development. So making that a reality, putting in place the planning rules changes, the investments to make that a reality, that is a real challenge.
And define a little bit compact for those of us who may not know exactly
what
you
I
mean
think
by that.
you know, Dublin is, for example, is characterised by very considerable sprawl. It makes the running of efficient public transport very difficult to do. We don't have district heating. We don't have combined heat and power systems. We have built a city that is not compact or connected or low in its carbon patterns. We need to shift that. But that would be one area where you would start. But I think we also need to look at each sector and look at raising our ambitions. So as I mentioned as well, we need to raise our ambitions about how quickly we roll out electric vehicles, how quickly we roll out deep retrofitting in our housing stock, how quickly we decarbonise our electricity network itself. We have still coal and peat burning activities in Ireland, and we need to migrate out of those as quickly as we can. But also, of course, I mentioned price matters. I'm an economist by trade. If people have the choice now, like if you raise the carbon tax tomorrow, a lot of people are locked into patterns. But if people know what the trajectory is over time, we would be confident that the choices they make, be it around their modes of travel, their modes of heating, their commitment to a deep retrofit, those would change because they would see the returns to private action higher. But of course, as I acknowledge also, if someone is seeking a €50,000 loan to have a retrofit of their home, if they have to pay 10% small loan charge, it's very difficult for them to do it. And that's where I suppose the work you're doing will be invaluable to work with what we're hoping to do. So agriculture, of course, is another.
And agriculture is another area.
It's another area.
And one where we haven't actually focused enough, clearly, and is a real problem, in terms of Europe in general. So I think that some of the work that you're doing in thinking about agriculture might be very helpful for Europe at large. Can I come back to your economist by training? Because actually we've been speaking a lot over the last 2 days around we need to get away from a Band-Aid approach, and we may have to look at the systems, including the economic system beyond GDP, the indicators. You've talked a little bit about costing, so costing externalities, etc. Having just been in Italy, the Minister of the Economy actually indicated to me that he was open to thinking about beyond GDP and having a conversation with other ministers around that particular topic. What is some of your thinking around that?
Well, I mean, I think in Ireland, we're probably unique in that GDP is not regarded as an indicator of economic activity, yes, a reliable indicator anymore, and we do look elsewhere. We're looking much more at other indicators, employment activity and other indicators. So I think it would be a natural move for us to look at issues around sustainability and genuine quality of life. We have colleagues from the Department of Finance here. I don't know to what extent we've done the sort of underpinning to bring that in. Traditionally, budgets are still presented, well, we use this GNI star instead of GDP now to be more accurately a reflection of income available in the Irish economy. But I do think we need to shift our thinking in that area, and it would be a very clear national signal that what we were valuing had shifted as we seek to have a step change in the attitude to climate.
Okay, fantastic. So I'm going to call you on that.
Exactly. Well, I liked it. Very good.
So I'm not totally finished yet, guys, because I'm fascinated by the fact that you're Minister for Communications, Climate Action and Environment. And actually having toured with the Commissioner for Climate Action, Connie Hedegaard, who wanted to bring the message of climate action to the people, I'd like to finish on that question to you, because we've been speaking a lot about how do you bring people on the journey. We have seen that there is continued radicalization on the right and the left, that the climate crowd and intellectuals who are warning the alarm bells are being often put into a category of either doomsday scenarists or that they are actually elitist in their approach. So how are you mixing your portfolio, and how are you looking at the communications aspect? And maybe you can give us some examples of what we should be doing across Europe, because I think that actually it's a fantastic title to have.
It certainly is. I mean, if you take those three items, communications are going to change the nature of a lot of how we learn, how we work. Climate action is going to determine whether we succeed in not being Malthusians. As you know, economics is the dismal science, because Malthus predicted that the population would decline because food would run out. So we need to make sure that we can tackle climate change and don't fulfill Malthus's dismal view of the world. But also environment represents, the what we ought to pass on to the next generation in a better condition than we received it. So for me, I think I've been given the three most important things that will determine the next century. There's huge responsibility. On the political question, which is a much more profound one, in my view, is that how do we get a return to evidence-based policy thinking? I'd say the jury is out on that. I am continually discouraged by some of the, I suppose, political decisions that are being made in our nearest island and in other countries that don't suggest that evidence-based policy making is a big factor in voting intentions. But I do think that we can't blame the electorate for that. I think we have to look at what it is that we are doing in the centre ground of politics that has undermined public confidence in the models that we thought were relatively well embedded in the way we did public business, and in particular the way Europe did its business. This concept of sharing sovereignty to do more together, it would seem an absolutely vital building block if we're to face climate change or many of the other global challenges. And yet what we're seeing is a retreat in the opposite direction, to move away from international collaboration, to move away from rule-based decisions. So it is discouraging, but I think the onus is back on us as politicians to find, in the European context, new projects that show that the type of politics that we do from the centre ground, based on shared sovereignty, can deliver results. So in many ways, the work that you're doing today of carrying the message of this huge challenge we face into the financial community, just as I'm trying to carry it into the various sectors of our own economy, that is part of the way I think we rebuild the centre and the credibility of the centre. And I think there is still a fervour out there among the electorate, if we present the evidence right, to get people in behind this project. But I think we've seen too often the centre is losing out, or that middle ground evidence-based policy making is losing out to the people who want someone to blame for every problem that we face. Yes. And I think it is a challenge to all of us. And I don't have the answers. I don't have a model that I can say roll out the rest of Europe. But I think it's hard work and working on building the connection of the citizen. We have, for example, have had a citizens' assembly, which have only recently looked at climate action, looked at social reform, have been instrumental in major constitutional change in our country. So engaging with citizens has proven to be a very valuable approach in Ireland. And as you would see, the centre ground is largely holding in Ireland at the moment. Dangerous to say that, yes. but it is.
Thank you. Now I will conclude, but I want to, first of all, thank you for what you've just said, because I think that taking into consideration the midterm elections that I've been watching very closely, and my opening reference also to some very famous Irish Americans, including the Kennedy family, the way in which you've just described the responsibility of the leader and is for me, and I think many of us who sit in this room, absolutely fundamental, that we don't continue to dumb down, move away from evidence-based policy making, and not allow policymakers to actually be thinkers as well, rather than actually use the Twitter sphere as the only basis for the way in which they express their thought. So I welcome you warmly to the Irish government on behalf of at least all of us that are here. It's been so nice to hear you speak and to know that actually you've only been in the job 2 weeks and you are already so incredibly eloquent. So you obviously know, you obviously already know the topic matter, and that's really important if we're all going to work together and change things. So it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much indeed. Thanks very much.
So I'm going to now introduce my dear friend Nick. Nick Robbins is a real mover and shaker in this realm, and so exciting to see what he's doing now with some of the finance centers that are focusing on sustainability. Nick has been in this game for a long time, and Nick and I have worked together, bumped into each other, seen each other in a variety of different cities across the globe, trying to really make sure that we make a difference, not only in the financial world, but also in the sustainability world, and bring those two worlds together. So, Nick, once again, you're bringing us another very important changing project, which you are now going to describe. So, welcome.
Thanks so much, Sandrine. I'd like to actually ask the panel to come up. Teresa, Pierre Ducret, Pierre Rousseau, Emile Stigsgaard, and Tony Balladriga. My name is Nick Robbins. I'm here as a professor in practice for the LSE, but also founder-director of the Financial Centres for Sustainability Network. As our financial leaders are settling down, I just really wanted to give you a little sense about what is being launched here with this Financial Centres Europe platform and why the role of Climate-KIC is so important and how you can get involved. First, I want to thank Minister Bruton for his endorsement and launch here. I think it's important, those 3 digits that he gave in terms of the Irish sovereign bond. Actually, green sovereign bonds are a cheaper way of raising capital. That's important. I would really like to thank Climate-KIC for its inspired partnership. We have this global financial centers for sustainability network launched in September 2015. From that moment, Climate-KIC distinguished itself for its inspired willingness to partner and willingness to cooperate. So the platform we have today, FC for Us Europe, is a result of that. And so thanks, Kirsten, thanks, Rion, Scott, and Ben for your partnership. We also have many representatives in the room of financial centres. These are real places who have joined this network from Dublin here to Frankfurt, Geneva, Milan, Liechtenstein, London, Luxembourg, Paris, Stockholm, and Zurich. Also very good to see in the room, we have Lamia Mazuki here from Casablanca, and is in Casablanca where we launched this network a year ago. And I think it was that energy and urgency that came out of Africa that really helped us move forward. Also wanted to mention this is a global network, so Hong Kong, which I know where Pierre Rousseau lives, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Toronto, and importantly now, New York, Wall Street. Mike Bloomberg has indicated he will be setting up a financial center initiative in New York, in the Big Apple, to make that a much greener place. So we have a global network. So this Financial Centers for Sustainability Europe platform, what are we planning to do? We want to attract new financial centers across Europe, and with Climate-KIC and you, we want to build the tools that will enable all of Europe's financial centers to really deliver the systemic innovation we need. Now, a network sounds very nice. We build networks all the time, but it has to work, and it has to work very, very hard because we have not got much time. So why are we focusing on financial centers? And before I go to the panel, I just want to give you a little sense about why we think this is a transformational point of intervention. Financial centers are where the supply and demand of capital comes together. They're the hubs in this global financial system. They're where banking, capital markets, civil society, fintechs, insurers, investors, regulators, universities all come together. And we know these have powerful spillover effects, whether we're here in Dublin, whether we're in Copenhagen, whether we're in Warsaw, whether we're in London, whether we're in Frankfurt or Paris. And what we want to do in this network is harness those spillover effects to accelerate financial flows for a zero carbon, resilient and inclusive economy. So that's why we're focusing on financial centers. That's why we're trying to harness the power of place, and that's why we're so excited to be working in partnership with the Climate-KIC crew.